Deep in a remote forest, we invited 6 professionals from industry and academia to discuss how artificial intelligence is changing our society. These are the insights from their conversation. Welcome to AI Campfire.
One of the most interesting developments we've had in recent times was an open letter written by some pretty high-profile figures saying that we don't understand the risks, we haven't paid attention to it enough, it's too disruptive, and we need to halt all frontier AI development. So the big question right now with the emerging standards and regulation is this a technology that deserves standalone regulation? And are we actually moving in the right direction? Are we getting the benefits out of the technology, and is that outweighing the burdens?
It's a tool, it's neutral, it depends on the hands that it's in. So I think we do need regulation. We have so many of our infrastructures that are overstretched, underfunded, and can't provide the service that we've kind of come to expect. I'm talking about high-risk use areas like policing, like health, actually putting infrastructure around it so that it has the appropriate guide rails. That means I'm trusting somebody that knows more than me to put those guide rails in place.
Often people say it needs guardrails, it needs ethical standards, but when you say actually what are those things, as usually everyone goes, well, that's complicated, or it depends, or we need to really think about it. Saying it depends isn't good enough, right? You've got to say it depends on X, Y, and Z, and it's up for people to figure out what is the criteria now, how are we going to make these decisions. But James, as an expert in governance, with where we are at with AI policy and AI standards, are we getting more clear on what those guardrails should be?
I think one of the things that I found so brilliant with the AI Act, at least, was the fundamental rights impact assessment. It's the first regulation of its kind around that kind of technology, where there's a requirement to look at the way the technology impacts people's human rights in that sense. Of course, we've had data privacy impact assessments, but this really goes that step beyond. And I hope that the changes and the approach of regulating technology that we've seen with AI here will also extend to other technologies in the future.
For yourself, Professor Ram, as someone who is an expert in robotics, right? If you look at how there's emerging even standards and regulation, there's often not a lot talked specifically about physical robotics, even though this humanoid robots has been one of the biggest waves this year, right? Is this something that you think is being overlooked right now when it comes to robot ethics? Because there seems to be still, in my view, a bit of a perception that this seems a little bit more sci-fi. And again, I feel like there could be a risk that you get blindsided again like we were with generative AI.
That's certainly a possibility. So robotics is a very broad space. It ranges from the seemingly mundane like manufacturing and warehousing to really science fiction things about humanoids and so on. On the other hand, if you think about how robotics actually gets implemented in the world, it comes under sectors, and the existing way in which we think about sector-specific regulation and the regulatory infrastructure, it does actually cover it. For instance, you don't have to know the subtleties of how an autonomous vehicle is built, but there are existing regulations around what is allowed to be put on the road, what degrees of kind of autonomy you could have, and it does cover it. Likewise, you think about healthcare systems or medical systems, there are existing medical device regulations that cover them. As these new technologies come in, are you pushing the boundaries of these mechanisms? You are, but not in a way that's completely unanticipated. Historically, there were a lot of kind of white spaces where people were filling in the gaps, where even though their job description formally did not say something, they were doing informally some things, right? But then when you automate that role, then nobody's doing that. And that's the real danger.
The blind spots.
Yeah, and it's those blind spots that somehow these mechanisms must catch.
Positive development to me is the rise of AI safety institutes, which should function theoretically as neutral platform as it could be to do research and development on the most frontier aspects of AI, but with the lens of ethics. So what do you think about how we can actually prepare for the future of the harms that haven't yet materialized but are on the horizon?
For one, I think a lot of the harms that will materialize are not so fundamentally different to the existing harms we've already seen. For example, LLMs exhibiting bias is not so different from an old classifier exhibiting bias. So I'm actually quite encouraged, and I very much agree that it's great to see a regulation for this technology. And I'm not just thinking about the AI Act, but also the AAA, ADA, IRIA. I mean, across the pond, there's a lot happening too. So ultimately, I think we're going to see a core, a nucleus of common things that are no longer acceptable. I think that really will help us move forward. I mean, that's what we're doing at Oxford, right? Is we're developing standardized processes to develop trustworthy AI systems. And to your point, right, it's not just a principle, there are strict requirements, right? It needs to be legally compliant with regards to GDPR. So if you've done a DPIA, great. But if you are in insurance or financial service, you also have to do an Article 29 fundamental rights impact assessment if you want to operate in Europe. So very clear requirements, and then technical robustness, you can decide which fairness metric. And then comes the ethical bit. That's sort of the gray zone, right, where you have to judge a system against the standards you've set out as an organization. But that's already quite a structured way to assess this. I always tell my students, the Wild West of the AI world's over. So, long answer to your question, we will not be able to design good protocols for any future risk. But my view is that good protocols will prevent most current risks and the majority of future risks. So I'm actually quite positive and pro-regulation as a way to safely innovate with AI.